I don't think that the argument that I gave you is successful. I don't think argument's particularly useful. But once you start talking about theories and total evidence, it's very hard to get a grip, right, to make progress.
Mm. Yeah, it is, because you're dealing with so many moving parts at once when trying to assess the question, does God exist? It's enormously complex, and to come to a total judgment, you have to hold it all together. That's tough. That is tough to do. That's at least what I'm finding, even with just a single argument like the fine-tuning argument. It was the subject I picked for my master's dissertation. Kind of on a whim, because you have to pick something. But I'm glad that I did, because it's so much philosophy all at once. And so if you ask me, like you just said, what is your confidence in your particular analysis of this argument? Not very high. I could easily have gone wrong at several junctures. So, I mean, how do you avoid then an automatic agnosticism? You know, if it really is just so much to try and take in at once, it almost seems that the human mind is incapable of doing it, and so we should just be agnostic. That is my constant battle.
Right. So you have friends in philosophy. Richard Feldman is one person who notoriously argued that philosophers should be agnostic about all philosophical claims. Right.
I feel that hard.
Right. But I think that it's fine to have opinions and just to stick to them. Right. So this is one of the areas where this is that I think about quite a lot is the epistemology of disagreement, right? And so there's this dispute between the people who think that when you come up against a peer who disagrees with you, you should both shift towards the middle ground. And there are people who think, nah, you shouldn't do that. You should just stick because in philosophy, it's common knowledge, right, that whatever opinions you've got, most philosophers disagree with you, no matter what you think, right? And so philosophy would become utterly boring if we all just moved to the agnosticism about anything. That would be the death of the discipline, right? It's perfectly fine to have these opinions, even though you can't really persuade other people to agree with you. I worry about this a lot. Right, I worry about philosophy a lot, what kind of discipline it is, given that it has these features. But I'm not inclined to change my views about my philosophical opinions. Right? I'm not inclined to do the Feldman thing and just collapse. It sounds like you're more inclined to do it than I am.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, maybe it can help me avoid that just by knowing other prominent philosophers who go, I don't. I go, okay, well, maybe. It's a complicated question. It's a metaphilosophical question, and a related question is the extent to which there's progress in philosophy. Now, I think that would be one maybe empirical argument for the Feldman conclusion, in that it's not obvious that philosophy over its multi-thousand-year history has made a whole lot of progress towards settled conclusions. Now, maybe it's made a different kind of progress, but it does lend itself to a perennial agnosticism to reflect soberingly on the past history of philosophy as one where we don't seem to be moving the battle lines much.
So I read the history quite differently from the way that you just read it, though. So if you go back far enough, there are very few areas where there's a kind of considered expert opinion, a body of stuff that people who are knowledgeable just agree on. Initially, it happened in mathematics. I mean, there was common sense stuff, like, is there a fox running across the path? Right, all competent adults can tell, right? So there's expert agreement on that kind of stuff. But beyond sort of common sense, the first area is maths. But later, there's this natural philosophy, which goes on for millennium without making any progress, really. There's just all these people, all these, but eventually, sometime in the kind of middle of the second millennium, roughly, we start to get a handle on methods for answering those questions, and consensus develops on answers to all kinds of questions that people in earlier times had just guessed at. And that process continues. So here's a nice example. In the 1820s, you can find philosophers saying, we'll never know what the stars are made from. We know they're a long way away and there's no way we can go there. We can never find out. Somewhat ironically, the decade before, the secret to how we were eventually going to answer that question had already come to light, but it still took, right? It's still another 100 years in the future before we get it settled. If you think about all the academic disciplines, they all once were philosophy, and psychology doesn't really get going till the middle of the 19th century. Sociology a bit later. Chemistry's a little bit after physics and so on, right? Really scientific biology. It's a bit kind of unclear exactly when we think it's really getting settled, and there's lots of agreement on kind of interesting theoretical things and so on. So philosophy makes progress by turning into something else, and that happens a lot. And so that's my answer, right? Now, there are some things that we haven't made any progress on since Aristotle. Maybe we never will. Maybe metaphysics is just doomed to be something that we make no progress on. Maybe. But maybe not. Maybe one day, we'll sort things out and there'll be some way in which kind of global independent expert consensus is constructed. Don't know.